Hello everybody, my name is Mishael Stefan Haholongan and I'm going to present my paper which is titled The Interrelationship of Architecture and Fashion, Representation of Aesthetic Value. Basically, architecture and fashion are branch of art that have direct purpose to cover and protect the human body, connected to how art is an aesthetic form and how aesthetic means is the perception of individuality. Human have a tendency to choose form of architecture and fashion as representation of self. Though it's different in scale and its functions, both of architecture and fashion perceive the way human lives, how they overlook their society, and show their identities. Moreover, architecture and fashion can be understood from aesthetic qualities and stylistic principles. However, though its meaning in individual subjectivity, the aesthetic in architecture and fashion of individuals have a tendency to change based on its society. Thus, it raises a question. First, what are the important aspects that create an relationship between architecture and fashion in relation to aesthetic values? How can we understand the aesthetic values represented in architecture and fashion through the perception center? How does the aesthetic values in architecture and fashion apply in current society? The used method here is by inspecting through theories and readings about relating subjects in architecture, aesthetic, architecture and fashion, and overlook through the practices of what is done. First things first, this connects to the importance of understanding the aesthetic of an art in order to grasp an understanding in what is represented. Moreover, since art is basically a desirable object and desire is ascribed to the society, it's important in judging the value of aesthetic based on one's holistic inclinations change into a final source of objectivity that determines one aesthetic form, and even though it offers an treacherously unique form, the meaning fell into collective consciousness. So basically, aesthetic value engage the mind of humans' subjectivity to oppose the undesirable reality and support the idea that is implemented in the aesthetic form, which is art and by any means is the architecture and fashion. Two way aesthetic value implemented and work together in architecture and fashion to complement human lives are by balancing the outflow of one another in when it is grasped and how the balance happen is by using the physical elements as the representation and play an important aspect in representing the aesthetic value that is also connected to time and place where it belongs to. And the balance can be also from how it works together to ensure human safety and etc. As it is the form of aesthetic, the product of architecture and fashion has an internal value. And social aspect takes role in determining the value of aesthetic form. The developed aesthetic value are to be divided as their function to show the class and desired items by the society to supporting and opposing social norms, supporting and opposing ideology propagation, and representing the cultural and tradition identities. For the representation of certain society, it can be seen in how Baroque and Rococo's granted in bourgeoisie class, and both of their product of architecture and fashion there also have a similarity in how it is represented in grandeur by showing the massive, massive, massive arc in the gown or in the hallway, and by using excessive shiny materials in gold in architecture and in fashion it's the jewelry so on for how it's supporting or opposing the social norms it can be seen on how Iran's pre-Salafist era that has mandatory to conceal the women's privacy more as it is the conservatism so in that era it is obligatory for women to wear more conservative clothing that cover the whole body, and it is also really important to protect the women's privacy in the design aspect. So basically, the most of the time at pre-Pahlavi Iran, the plan of the building in the women's room doesn't have an open window to the street. So nobody except a family member can see the women there. Moving on how it support and oppose the ideology propagation can be seen on the fashion show in Dior Fall Winter 2020, Runway and Balenciaga Fall Winter 2020. So basically, the set design space complement the showcase outfit to propagate the idea of in Dior, it's gender equality that is shown by the minimalism that connects to masculinity and architecture, and how in there gender equality is shown by the women who wears a, a suit that was the majority only for a man to be worn, and then also the awareness of climate change for Balenciaga can be seen on how the aftermath of the climate change by the major usage of black color as it's shown that by that, and also the runway in architecture, the front row runway seat is also floated. That means everybody can be subject to climate change. Moving on cultural tradition, architecture and fashion have a tendency to serve as the glorified object of culture. For example, in such culture as cultural cult in Catholic or in Batak, some object is really glorified, and it is shown by its usage in festivities on how it maintains the credibility of the work inside the cultural aspects and the relation of the work in its history of how insertion is determined. And in nowadays society, architecture and fashion plays a bigger role as the handling of the pandemic, as the aesthetic value that implemented uphold more safety of individuals and keeping distance on human beings. Thus, the design space is recognized in order to fit into what the needs of human and the mandatory of wearing masks, placing more on the creativity in the fashion industry. In this modern era, the significance of architecture and fashion in its physical does not necessarily the same. However, both however, both still work together to prevent the spreading of COVID-19 in the new normal. In short, the important aspect that create the interrelationship of architecture and fashion consists of how it balances one another regarding to the physical elements of or how it works to complement humans' life. The way aesthetic value can be understood by humans is by applying the principles that create the interrelationship that represents on which society based on time and place it belongs to that created by the designer. Nowadays, the aesthetic value uphold the importance of distancing tools and safety. Tools, architecture and fashion indeed plays a big role to ensure they have the safety of human beings and their health. So that's all. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.